All right, good evening, everyone. It is Monday, January 26, 2026. This is a public meeting of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of this meeting was posted at the entrance doors of the Education Service Center and on the district's website. It was also sent to the West Bend Community Memorial Library, the Daily News, WRYU, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. I'll pause to ask Superintendent Wimmer to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Please rise and join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We recognize a quorum of our board with all 7 members present. Next on our agenda is to consider approval of the agenda, which was posted in advance. I'd move to approve this agenda. Is there a second? Second. Melanie, thank you. Motion and second to approve the agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion is carried, and we have an approved agenda. Next is public participation. I don't see any public participation comment cards in the audience. We'll move forward then to our consent agenda. On our consent agenda, we have minutes of the January 12th, 2026 regular board meeting and executive session. We have a number of contracts, 1 new and 13 renewal contracts, 3 resignations, 4 retirements. We have an agreement modification with Epstein Ewan Architects for fixed fee amount for Jackson, Silverbrook, and the Badger projects. An East and West Golf Team course usage agreement for the spring 2026 season, and enrollment projections for open enrollment seats. And Superintendent Wimmer, I believe that was an item we talked about at the last meeting, and the board requested it be placed in the consent agenda. Is that correct? Correct. Thank you. That concludes, I believe, the contents of our consent agenda. Are there any questions on any of the items in the consent agenda? Hearing none, I'd move to approve this consent agenda. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Joe. We have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. We move then to our reports. Our first report tonight is a construction report, and Tim Harder, our Director of Facilities and Technology, has come to the podium to give that report. Good evening.
Good evening, board members. Real quick report, because we do have an item on for Jackson tonight. This summer, our work pertains to not just the start and the kickoff of the new Jackson Elementary building, but work at Silverbrook Badger and some external work out at the parking lot front area of Green Tree to redo that parking lot and the drop-off pickup sequence around some safety pieces. And so those projects are currently out to bid. Wednesday afternoon is when we start to do bid opening with those. We've had a ton of interest in those smaller projects. It's always interesting hearing from our Findorf team of everybody loves the big new projects and all of those. Myself and Derek Gallenberger from Findorf and Kyle Lauder did a walkthrough for contractors, and we had literally 14 people show up for the Badger one and 17 show up at Silverbrook, which we thought was amazing. Many trades across the board there, but many multiples at that point in time. So we look forward to going through that process and seeing what those bids bring to us. With the Green Tree project, because it is redoing and changing that Green Tree parking lot area in the driveway, that will need to go in front of the City of West Bend as part of their plan commission and so forth. So once we kind of see what that specs out in terms of dollars and bids and time, we will work that process through and start that piece there. Otherwise, schedule-wise, you'll see some stuff with a contract change here for Jackson, but we are on track in Jackson to start that work this spring. Excited. We did sell off, and you guys approved at the last board meeting that building for I call it selective demolition or piecemeal definition to be reused. So we've been talking with that owner and starting prep work already down at Jackson Elementary. Any questions you have this evening?
Board members, any questions? We appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next report tonight is a financial report. Lenny Hansen, our Assistant Superintendent, will present that report. Good evening.
Good evening. We have 2 items that we'll touch on today. The first one we're very excited to share about, which is the issuance of the remaining debt associated with the November 2024 referendum. The board authorized a resolution back in December to engage in the sale of the remaining $26.25 million in promissory notes, and then that sale took place on January 13th. So as you probably recall, prior to the referendum, we were communicating to the community that we anticipated a 4.75% interest rate on that debt. The first issuance last April came in under that at 4.33%, so we were happy to report that. 4.42%. We were happy to report that, and a lot of that was attributed to an upgrade in the district's credit rating by S&P from a AA- to a AA. We were able to hold our AA rating, and we had an outstanding sale where instead of 4.75%, the notes were sold at an all-in cost of 3%. So we were very pleased to hear that. When you put everything together, the sale of the April 2025 notes as well as this sale, and you look at that anticipated interest cost instead of that 4.75%, with the all-in costs combined, we have reduced the projected interest cost by $10.7 million compared to what was communicated before the referendum. So we're very excited about that. That'll be a direct savings to the taxpayer compared to what we had communicated in the lead up to the referendum. That's avoided future payments. That's really the maximum possible amount that the community could repay, because our district also has a long history of debt refinancing, paying down debt early. Those strategies can all still be pursued in the coming years, but we're really happy to report that more than $10 million in avoided potential interest costs is the result of that sale. Those proceeds will be taken in by the district at the start of February, and then we're currently working with our proceeds management partner, American Deposit Management, who is developing the investment plan for those funds so that they can earn good interest, but also be available at the exact right moment when we require those funds along the way throughout our projects. So, any questions about that topic?
No?
All right.
Question? Sure. Chris?
I think it's easy for us to say about the savings of 10.7 million. That's really exciting. Can you illustrate that into a more, equitable, like what's the average savings for the average taxpayer, so it's more digestible for somebody to understand?
Well, it probably won't be smart for me to do that off the top of my head right now.
I get it.
But I would be happy to bring back
Yeah.
a comparable, comparison for that in the future. I mean, compared to the amount of interest that we thought would accompany the referendum, the amount of interest has been reduced 18%. So almost 1 in 5 interest dollars that the taxpayer would have paid won't happen. The tricky part about giving it an exact dollar figure is that it fluctuates from year to year, right? So you sell each year of maturity of these notes in different amounts in order to yield the best all-in interest costs, but we can definitely come up with some sort of estimate of what that means for a taxpayer over the long haul.
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions?
All right. The only other item I won't touch on too much, but we continue to present in financial reports to the board anytime that we receive updated information that would make us cause any adjustments to the assumptions that are built into our budget forecast, which we'll be talking about shortly. So those are going to come in throughout the year. We work with our financial partners. We talk, we hear information from DPI, and along the way, it causes small tweaks in that modeling as we go. So, we're really trying to, on these two items, which is Fund 27 reimbursement rate, we're actually trying to project like expenses that won't be reported to DPI for a year, but you can do some modeling based on what's already been turned into DPI, and it lets you create some updates. So that's all that's reflected here, and we'll just continue. You're going to see numbers fluctuate as we learn more. That is the typical practice of how forecasting works. So we put that in here just so that the board is aware. As you recall, in December, we brought forward a large assortment of assumptions, and now anytime we tweak any of those numbers, we want to make sure that we're upfront with the board as to what those tweaks are and why they were made. So, questions about that? Otherwise, that concludes my report.
Great. Any last questions? All right, hearing none. Thank you. Appreciate your report. Our next report is the superintendent's report. Superintendent Wimmer.
Sure. The ballot placement drawing for the spring school board election was held in January. 3 candidates submitted candidacy paperwork for the spring election, which is held April 7th. The placement drawing determined that the candidates will appear on the ballot in the following order. Each one of them filed again to return to their position, and we appreciate their service. Kelly Lang, Chad Temez, and June Kruger. So that's how you'll see them on the ballot this spring. Again, those were the only 3 to have filed. We are continuing to do our elementary boundary work. I just wanted to give you an update. We said we kind of keep bringing this back. You'll hear about it. I'll keep updating you, but it'll come back in stages before you actually see it as something to take action on. So you know that due to the upcoming closures of Fair Park and Decorah, the transition of Silverbrook to become an elementary property, that causes us to look at the elementary boundaries for attendance areas. I have met now, I've concluded, my final meeting was just that week prior with all PTO leaders who hosted me, and we had open forums for families to come and talk about kind of what their hopes were, talking about transition pieces, all of those. The most interesting conversation where, you know, I'm unrolling a map is at McLean. They are sitting next door to Silverbrook. So to make that attendance boundary, that's where I have to carve out, and it changes. Just a thanks to those families. We were talking through what that looks like and how we can mitigate the impact to families. We talked about things like grandfathering kids in. If you've started there, how can you stay there? How could we do a priority? We offer interdistrict choice. How might we have that a priority zone for placement if they're walkable? There's no impact on transportation. They're both walk zones to those schools. Some things we could do to mitigate that impact and still honor our pieces of choice. So we have all those ideas and then talked about, like I said, at Fair Park Decorah, what they'd like to see with that closure, what that looks like. So I'll be kind of putting those things together, testing that with Go Right Way, our transportation provider, what that kind of little carve-out looks like, as well as some of that grandfathering language, putting that all together. And then I'm going to send that out to all elementary families that would be directly impacted by that for feedback before I bring that forward to the board to take a look at. And we can do it a couple ways. I can keep everyone in the loop, but there is a specific policy. We have policy coming up February 17th. I think that's a little too short of a turnaround to get the kind of feedback I'm looking for. We also have one in May. I can, kind of depending on the work, I think that'll fall somewhere in between there. I can bring it to the full board out of the gate. I can bring it to policy committee at our meeting in May. Really up to the board how we want to pursue that. And not anything we need to answer right now. I can keep you informed, but that's the intent, is to kind of draft that plan, get it in front of transportation, and then send that out. So from some deeper feedback from our families before I ask the board to kind of take that in and finalize anything. Any feedback around kind of that game plan that's in front of us? Like it. Yeah, families were really responsive and helpful in planning, and I think really pleased as we talk through some of the pieces, what could be open to them. I think they were really pleased that they still have options and opportunity, so we will craft that then. I'd like to send congratulations and good luck to West Bend junior Moira Andrews and her synchronized figure skating team, the Fond du Lac Blades. The team recently competed in Poland at the Hevelius Cup and brought home the bronze medal. Plus, Moira and the team are representing the USA at 2 more international competitions this month. Up next is the Lemire Cup in the Netherlands. So congratulations and keep on going. In additional skating news, last Saturday, the West Bend Ice Bears boys hockey team once again held a military appreciation event during its game Saturday against Waukesha. They hold a silent auction, had some great items, and they put 100% of the proceeds toward organizations that support military and first responders. So thank you to the fans who ventured out in the still cold temps on Saturday to support a great cause. Also recognition for our Silverbrook singers. On January 17th, 8 Silverbrook Intermediate School choir students took part in the Wisconsin Choral Directors Association annual All-State Choir performance in Eau Claire. So they worked on pieces in advance and spent the day rehearsing and performing with the full all-state choir. The following students participated: McKenna Bovair, Sophia Herdman, Joni Lenzo, Lydia McKeown, Emily Mabius, Peyton Spaeth, Riley Weber, Amelia Wicks. So just congratulations for their recognition and their performance to those Silverbrook Intermediate students. And then finally, just a reminder that January 28th, 7 p.m. marks the West Bend High School's band concert. So that winter concert will perform songs by Leonard Bernstein, Alfred Reed, and Dave Black. The concert is at the Silver Lining Arts Center at the high schools. Again, that's January 28th at 7 p.m., and the community is invited to join. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Superintendent Wimmer regarding her report? Superintendent Wimmer, I just, one related question. So recently, well, I could say recently, I think we've been surrounded every day with a cold weather event, but how did the students and faculty and facilities fare here? We closed the school for one day.
I'm pretty sure you could hear cheers from everyone when we did that. As we were monitoring, I think it was helpful in this case where we could give advance warning to families so they could coordinate childcare. So we were able to foreshadow on Wednesday, if this holds true, we're for sure closing. That cutoff is -30 for us, as is every area district. I said we're just going to wait and see that those predictions are pacing to be accurate, and they were. I think we hit -41 here as our coldest temp. So we were able to make that determination by Thursday, communicate that with families and staff so that they could all plan. And then as far as facilities, our facilities and our staff still report to work in the cold. So happy to report that we had no major instances. We were able to keep, we had regional competition for FBLA on Saturday. We had some outside groups running youth basketball tournaments, and they were really pleased that they could continue to run. We knew we were pushing heat through the weekend for them to do so.
Great. Any other questions? All right, thank you for your report. We move to our discussion items. First discussion item, financial forecast, and Mr. Hanson is returning to the podium to present this item.
All right. So we've been taking the board through this process, and we'll continue to do that step by step. Today, we're really laying out the process, the background that goes into that as we continue to develop a multi-year forecast that we can share with both the board and our community in a new way. So, first a little bit of background about our forecast process. So what is a multi-year forecast? So we really look at things generally over a 3-year period internally when we're trying to project forward. That's because you're building off those assumptions that we talked about earlier. And when you go more than 3 years, you're now multiple state budgets ahead. So you have a lot less predictability. We certainly look further ahead, but as far as bringing forward a lot of useful information for the board or the public, you really get pretty vague as you get that far ahead of the political process, which significantly impacts our budget process. So we already talked about those assumptions that initially presented in December. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of them that go into this process that we're constantly monitoring and shift at different times throughout the year. The starting point for the forecast is assuming a pure continuation of all our operations with expected inflation in each different area. It means no disruption. It means no reduction for attrition or anything, which we know is not real. Every year we talk at the podium about, a 7-figure number in terms of employees who just retire or are, or leave, and maybe a lower cost alternative, is what replaces that position. So, you start from kind of that most conservative scenario, and then we bring in all of the, realistic reductions that naturally happen, and that gets us closer and closer to what our actual projected budget is going to be, so that then we can start prioritizing and making decisions. Really, the goal here is to provide a lot of early visibility, not just for next year, but my goal really in this year has been and is going to continue to be to really present the board and the community with visibility into future years so that we can really see any fiscal challenges well in advance so that we can plan for that. So why do we use it? So again, it identifies those challenges in a longer-term manner so that we're not just being reactive in a year-to-year basis. Really lets us plan in a much more thoughtful manner, and it really is the best practice in high-functioning school districts. So when you're looking at that forecast, it is in almost all school districts across the state, it's going to start with large deficits. You've heard business managers for years and years at this podium talk about how we start with some very substantial deficits, right? Several $1 million. That is what's typical when you begin the process, and then you start looking for those opportunities for efficiency and increased effectiveness and opportunities for reducing that. But it is very typical to see deficits. And then since expenses tend to compound and inflate year over year, a deficit one year tends to grow the following year because you have to disrupt it. And by disrupting it earlier on, you then help yourself in future years. So that's very normal to see when you're looking at these projections. So again, it's a starting point, it's not a budget. Then gives us to have that time that we need as both administration and then with the board to look at all of our options, which ones are maybe one-time options for reducing budget deficits and which are recurring options, right, that yield savings in future years, and then allowing us to prioritize between those. We continue, and my plan is we will continue to update the board throughout this process, and this really goes all the way until that September annual meeting and then that October final approval of the budget, right? This is a long process, and that's just for 1 year. We will continue to update how future years look along the way as we go. So as we are working on that right now at this point, our financial partners are validating our data and our modeling, and it's a good opportunity to look at something we haven't looked at actually in several months, which is just an overview of some key revenue and expense trends that are certainly going to influence us as well as school districts across the state. So we've collected some different data points from some public policy entities and some authorities on these matters to give some overview. So first we'll talk a little bit about revenue. So you've seen graphs similar to this in prior years, but really what it's showing is how school district per pupil revenues have increased, that's the blue line, versus the average inflation rate. That's not the year-to-year inflation rate, because as we know, there's been some wild fluctuation in some recent years, but if you average it across, right, and you see that widening gap over the last 15 years or so, right? Now, it's really important to note that some people might wonder, say, well, there's declining enrollment in West Bend and across the state, so wouldn't that mean there's less spending? This is not a cumulative spending. This is per pupil, right? So decline enrollment doesn't matter when you're talking about a per pupil funding level, right? So you're talking about an amount that when multiplied by the 5,500 students or so, you're talking about more than $15 million in revenue per year that a school district would be expecting to be receiving compared to what was typical back in pretty much up until 2010, 2011, right? So this trend doesn't just impact West Bend, it impacts all school districts. Putting it in perspective at the West Bend School District level, so our per pupil revenues dropped below where they were in 2011 and stayed below that 2011 level until 2020. So revenues had been here. There was a big drop, as we all know, in 2011, but then it didn't catch back up to the level it was at prior to that it took 9 years to get back to that point, right? So you can look at this in both long-term trend as well as a more recent trend, right? So over 15 years, the rate of inflation is double what our district's per pupil revenue increases have been. And again, has nothing to do with declining enrollment because I'm talking about per pupil. And then over a shorter term period, in the 5-year trend, inflation is outpacing the district's per pupil revenues by 50%. So we also have talked a lot about special education funding and that the state was going to attempt to make an investment here. This is, after property taxes and state aid, really the third largest revenue source that the district has, so it's important to look at it. And we've never been able to bring this forward before, but this is really a 45-year history of special education funding in the state. So in terms of what that reimbursement rate was, so early on, when special education first became something that the state committed to providing, there was a statutory guarantee that 70% of special education costs would be reimbursed by the state. And as you see, for decades then, the state failed to hold that promise after doing so for about the first 7-8 years that special education was a state-funded program. That brings us all the way forward to today, where we heard a lot about how special education reimbursement rate was going to jump to 42% this year and 45% next year. As I've reported here at the board level, DPI is reporting that it's going to come up probably well short of that. Currently, they're projecting 35% will be this year's amount. We won't know that final amount until June, but that is what our first payments of special education funding have been thus far this year, is at 35%. So again, that third largest revenue source, and also a non-revenue limited source, right? So taxes and state aid is a revenue limited source. This is a source outside of that. So an increase here can help us even if the revenue limit doesn't go up. Unfortunately, the state hasn't, invested there the way it did a few decades ago. And then the last piece, just try to tell that general story, because again, it's not just we've given some data that's West Bend School District specific. This is more statewide specific, but when you ask about, maybe this is just a trend that you see across the entire country, that really isn't the case. So, in the last, here you're looking back 23 years or so, the per pupil spending in Wisconsin has grown 2.4%, whereas nationally it's grown at almost 10 times that, right? So all of these tell a story of just why you tend to see some challenging budget situations talked about in the news. When we talk about deficits that we're closing, that's where that background comes from. Health insurance, after wages, is that second largest cost to the district. So in terms of some context around where that trend has been and where we're watching it in our modeling. So in the last 10 years, the West Bend School District's health insurance costs have increased at a rate of 55% faster than our per pupil revenues have, right? And as we've talked about before, 8% is that kind of typical annual increase in health insurance costs, right? Obviously, accelerating much faster than inflation. So I'm going to quickly review where some of our, where do the resources go in the district? And I'm going to quickly do this because we've brought this before the board before. So DPI does a great job making some publicly available data available on its website so that school districts, the public, can go and look and say, how does my local school district allocate its resources compared to other districts or to the state average? Right here, we line those up. We have a long-standing history of investing a larger share of our dollars here in the West Bend School District into the classroom, into instruction. That means both people, supplies, equipment that all directly are in contact with students. So, that means we're putting our dollars in front of kids, which is great. You can see, some of the areas that we reduce where our dollars go in order to allow for that on this chart. But we have a long-standing tradition of forcing more dollars into the classroom than our neighbors. And we believe, regardless of, projected deficits and so forth, we're going to be able to continue that trend of outpacing the state in terms of how much we are able to allocate towards instruction. So as I said, you can see that graph really tells you a lot about our priority. And what that means is that we have had to be much more efficient in other areas like operations, administration, transportation, pupil services. We've had to be more efficient in order to accomplish that, right? So if we're going to increase in one area, we have to be more efficient and decrease in another, and that's what we have a long history of doing. We're continuing to analyze efficiencies and effectiveness in all areas, right? So just because we might be allocating one place now and less in another, doesn't mean we can't still look at every single area, every single department for any place that we can continue to become more efficient so that we can hit that goal, which is continuing to prioritize instruction while achieving that long-term sustainability in our budget. So as we continue to go through this process, the next steps, like I said, our financial partners are validating our modeling. We're already exploring any opportunities for expense reduction, and like I said, that includes us leaving no stone unturned across the system. And then we'll be looking at that 3-year actual projection. We're putting the real figures in front of the board in the coming weeks. So a lot of information there, but hopefully gives you a background of all that's going into this process so that we can kind of for the first time give that multi-year look to the school board.
We appreciate the preview. Questions, board members? Joe?
I'm curious if you could comment on the facilities spending. It's pretty stark how much lower we are than the average school district.
Yeah, so our facility spending actually, if compared to 20 years ago, is up. So the district used to really operate leanly. So when you're looking at facility there, you are looking at capital maintenance. So they do provide the data as to which funds and account codes they pull this data for. So you're looking generally at your capital maintenance budget. The district had 20 years ago, significantly underfunded facilities. That led to a commitment more than a decade ago of setting a certain dollar amount and then automatically inflating that by a percentage of construction cost inflation each year, which we have held to ever since. So while you're absolutely correct there, that is actually an improvement from where the district's long-term history has been. At the same time, we have been talking with like our owner's rep as well as our construction manager, Findorf, to try and understand how has the need for investment in buildings changed, especially over the last few years as the cost of construction and maintenance has gone up, right? So we're looking at two different things. The board historically looked at a 4% annual increase in the inflation cost of construction. That's not what it is anymore. It's probably more 5, sometimes 6%. So this year's modeling increased that to 5%, which doesn't result in that much more dollars, but it does represent a philosophical trend shift that will compound over years. We're also looking at what is the cost per square footage that you should allocate for capital maintenance, right? Because we right now, due to the referendum, are really changing the state of a lot of our buildings, right? So Jackson probably was more of a $3 to $4 per square foot annually needed budget for capital maintenance. Well, when we move into a brand new building, you're probably talking more like $2 a square foot is what's more appropriate. So we've been working with those partners to say, okay, when all of this work is done, it's time to reset where our buildings are and what that allocation needs to be, and we'll come to the board and we'll talk about, hey, moving forward, we think this is the right base level in order to maintain our buildings. As we talked about throughout the referendum communications, reducing buildings, which will be reducing several, is going to help us in that area.
So just quick follow-up. So then will referendum-funded projects be included in this figure in
No.
futures? Okay,
This
so
data
that's
does
excluded.
not include referendum-funded projects.
Okay.
And DPI does that on purpose because
That would skew
does a
everything.
giant
Yeah.
referendum, totally skews their data for a year. Yep, good question.
If I could just ask, speaking of skewing data, is Milwaukee part of this state average? Because I feel like
Yep,
their numbers
are.
and their budget might skew the
Yep,
state
they are.
average.
I
Yep.
do want to point out that this data you're looking at is 23, 24, because that is the most recent data that DPI has collected, finalized, validated, and published. So we anticipate in the spring, they'll bring forward 24, 25, but DPI lags
Yep.
reality a lot in that, and probably similar in other municipal, areas. And Milwaukee's spending, while traditionally high, really has accelerated after that point, so we'll see how that may influence it. I can tell you, though, we also have pulled this data on district by district, so we've looked at us versus all of the other county school districts, and we see a similar trend.
Gotcha.
On that slide, you've got instruction, and then the next row is pupil, staff, support. Can you talk a little bit about what would be in that second box? I'd imagine the first box would be something like teacher salaries, but can you give an example just so I can understand what would be in that second row?
Yeah, so first in that instruction, it's teachers, teacher salaries. You're also talking textbooks. You're talking anything that is in direct contact with students, right? So pupils, that whole group, there is a lot in there. So you are going to talk about certain staff that is in front of kids, and you're also going to talk about pupils, service staff, and supplies that isn't in front of kids, right? So there's pupil service staff in this building that handle, special education evaluations, student services, operations, things like that. You're also going to see some of those individuals who contact kids. So you're talking about counselors and psychologists and things like that are also in there. So you do have a better mixture. And what we're going to be able to do for the board is that's a good, you're thinking similarly to how we are, because that's a piece of the pie that we're going to bring forward more data so you can kind of see what does that mean, right? So of that pie, which is showing 8.8% of our budget, what percentage of that would you consider like instructional or in contact with students versus the background side? Because we'll see a similar trend where we really work hard to be efficient in the non-student contact side of that piece of the pie so that we can push more resources into the student contact element of that.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? We appreciate the report and look forward to next steps as we go through the process. Thank you. All right, since financial forecast is complete, we next move to the discussion item, high school configuration and community engagement. Superintendent Wimmer.
So just a brief update. We had started foreshadowing to our staff and our families in our community around upcoming engagement opportunities. We have community forums scheduled for Monday, February 2nd, 6 p.m., Wednesday, February 11th at 6 p.m. We've secured space at the high school for both of those, so we'll start promoting where that will be just because we intend to host tours of the high school if people are interested following those sessions. I've scheduled the high school groups. We foreshadowed, we did kind of a video launch at their class meetings, and they'll be working with their leadership teams, that's Student Council, WBSD Way, different leadership teams that they have. I'll be working with their leaders, and then separately I'll be attending all lunch hours to just move through small group feedback circles. In addition, those students will all have access to the survey that we're doing as well. And then I'll start scheduling those ones with Badger, with their leaders as well as their entire school community. And you'll see we have one, we'll do a focus group specifically around athletics for all the students who are engaged in athletics or interested in athletics out of Badger in those high school years. So we'll be doing that. We also have set a staff meeting. We'll use an existing staff meeting in February from the high school, so the staff have an opportunity. They too can engage, much like referendum, in any of the community sessions, but also just a separate staff one. And then we've got our survey set for launch February 2nd through the 16th. We wanted to tag that so if people wanted to attend one of those forums first to get background, they had that opportunity prior to submitting that survey. In addition to those, I'll do a round with PTOs and connect with those leaders and get in front of those groups. I also will send targeted communications to our elected officials as well as all civic groups in the areas. If they want anything special, we'll schedule that in addition to. Just so wanted you to let you know those kind of engagement pieces were coming to fruition to keep us on target with engagement occurring all through February, and then positions the board in March to synthesize that feedback, hear from that, and make any decision, take any potential action going forward as early as March.
Board members, any feedback? Superintendent Wimmer, I'm assuming that, well, first of all, you've given regular updates on this topic, that there's really nothing earth-shattering that's been learned between last time and now to suggest a dramatic departure
No.
from what we talked about before. This seems very consistent with
Nope,
the
and
plan so far.
I'll take and I'll kind of repackage for that public each one of those little pieces. You've kind of got that info all along the way. So I'll repackage that, much like we did with referendum, an opportunity to kind of take in information, talk about it at small tables, so that we hear really individual voices and have that opportunity for reflection and feedback. So I would anticipate we'll keep moving through that. Mostly I hear, like, when are you gonna make a decision? When are you gonna decide? Like, they just want to, like, March, we're on track for March. Come out and come talk to us, share your thoughts and feelings, and we're on track, so that you have that synthesized, and we'll go from there.
Great. Other questions, thoughts? All right, we appreciate the update. Thank you. We have 2 action items tonight to consider. The first is school year calendar 2026, 2027, and our Director of Human Resources, Sarah Leatherman, is going to come to the podium and present this topic. Good evening.
Good evening. It's my first time at the podium. Isn't that exciting?
Fantastic.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hope you're as excited as I am
We are.
to talk about school calendar. So I'm just wanted to tell you about the process that went into designing the upcoming calendar for next year. So we convened a calendar committee. We had 15 staff members representing all of our sites, and then different employee groups. So we had administrators, we had certified staff, and we had support staff. The full committee met 3 different times from November through January, looking at district priorities, talking with staff, and then we also sent out a formal staff survey 2 different times for all staff. And then the committee met again to look at those results, kind of refine, and then that final one went out to all staff for feedback last week. So what we bring forward tonight is the proposed calendar for next year, which fully meets all the state requirements. If approved, our students in K through 12 would start on September 1st and then end on June 8th. And early learning would begin September 8th and end May 27th, because that program starts 1 week later and ends 1 week earlier than our K through 12. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have
Great.
any.
Board members, any questions? Mr. Jenkins.
I was going to say that June and I were both equally, I don't know if it was disappointed or excited that that school starts about the week before Labor Day. I'm guessing that was done because if you push it back with how late Labor Day is this year, it's going to really ruin June for everybody.
Yes, so we can't start before the 1st.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, since Labor Day is so late, it would be substantially late into the summer, which also affects summer school.
Yeah, so that was the only thing of note, is
Yeah.
that it's a little bit earlier than normal, but.
Oh, good question. And I know in the past, sometimes we brought multiple calendars, asked for board input. It sounds like this was a consensus calendar, so to speak.
It was. So initially, when the committee met, we drafted 4 different calendars, all different, starting, ending earlier, ending later, having PD days spread out. We kind of looked at starting winter break earlier, starting winter break later. We kind of went through all of those versions, and then we presented different priorities to the staff and had them prioritize different things that were important to them. And then when the committee met again, we looked at it from kind of the family perspective, from the student perspective, and then fine-tuned again, then took 2 draft calendars to the full staff again and had them prioritize. So the one that we're bringing to you has been vetted through many variations.
Great. Other questions, thoughts?
I know
Kelly?
this was a topic this year. When do you foresee graduation being?
Well, that is a great question.
I can speak to that. So when we were looking at and got down to the 2 calendars, this one kind of poses that piece with graduation. It's also compounded by the fact that we want to close out of that high school as early as possible, and have those graduations and get out, because we're going to be moving and starting construction. So when I talked with Jen Potter around, is this problematic? She said, no. We have a great process now in place. We take it right to the identified graduation committee of the students. We work through, and they foresee the same process. So they anticipate most likely that team will look at it and recommend that weekend right prior. They're moving through that. They're doing that this year, so they'll have that kind of experience of how that went. But as soon as we approve, their teams will get to work on that.
Other questions?
Just a comment, I like the extra day on both ends of spring break. That's
I think everybody will enjoy that.
That was the overwhelming choice.
It was, yeah.
All right. Well, this is an action item. So I would move to approve the 2026-2027 school year calendar as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We have a motion and second to approve the calendar as presented. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, and everyone who worked on this calendar. We appreciate you bringing it forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next action item, Findorf AIA contract amendment for Jackson Elementary School project. We invite Mr. Harder back to the podium to present this topic.
All right, good evening, board members. This evening in front of you, we have an AIA contract amendment change in what's called a change order. This is part of the overarching AIA contract, and an AIA contract is a standard set of contract used in the architecture and construction side of commercial business. This evening's contract change or change order is related to the Jackson Elementary School project. So if you were to go back about a month ago, we opened up that project to public bid through Findorf, our website, and numerous different places. A huge amount of interest, as I mentioned before, being a larger project. In some cases, we had 12 to 13 different subcontractors bid on what is known as a trade package. In front of you this evening, you have a guaranteed maximum price AIA change order for Jackson Elementary. That includes all of the different trade packages that go through making up all the different pieces of building a building. There are 38 different trade packages, general conditions, things like site utilities, along with some allowances. Those allowances are dollars set aside for things that may be unknown. You'll see one in there for things like soil conditions. As much as we can dig into those grounds, we do as much boring and everything else, you just don't know what you're going to find in certain pockets. There are things that you will see around moisture mitigation and floor prep, around concrete and various different things. And then you see contingency dollars in there for construction, liability, insurance, our contractor fees and so forth, and then that makes up the total project dollars for Jackson. The Findorf team, along with myself, collect all of those bids. So if Findorf is going to bid on a trade package, those dollars come to me, or those bids come to me, so they do not see them before bid opening. Each one of these trade packages goes through an extensive review process by a group of people, not only from the Findorf team. We have our own meetings here. Jeff from Huffman Keel is here this evening, and his team. Numerous meetings, phone calls, you name it, that go into digging into who is the best qualified person as we move forward or as we go forward. This price here is the guaranteed maximum price. As you see allowances and contingencies in there, it may even be lower, but it was nice. Findorf came in and they shared, as they brought their guaranteed maximum price, that we are within budget for the construction aspects of this job. So the presented contract for you this evening is within our defined budget for this. With the approval of this, we would then let the Findorf team know, and they would actually go back and award the additional subcontractors for this project. We had, let the board know there were a few that we were looking at setting up early on and giving them the notice. There are some things like steel and electrical that take a lot longer to procure, and we want to plan for those types of things. But this is similar to the exact same thing that we asked the board to review and approve when we did the Green Tree and McLean projects this summer, and you will see a similar process when we do and get the bids back for our 3 projects that I mentioned this summer. So we're very excited to present within budget this overall contract piece for you this evening, and then myself, or if you want Jeff to come to the podium, they certainly, we will answer your questions. When billing comes in for these, it's not just carte blanche, you have this amount of money for this trade. All of those bills will actually go through Jeff and Michelle at their team here. We look at them internally to make sure that we actually have taken care of all of those pieces, and they meet something that can be billed for that project at that point in time.
Thank you. Board members, what questions do we have?
I'm just curious if any of the bids for any of the trade packages were surprising at all, either higher or lower than we expected?
Not so much higher. There were some that were lower. And I think, in Jeff and myself and Mrs. Wimmer and the Findorf team, you really start to analyze what it is. There are some areas right now that we are seeing that people were looking for work. They hadn't filled out their summer at that time. It was really exciting. There are some other areas, I had asked the board to approve a fiber optic contract about extending our fiber optics down there. They want to procure those things now because those dollars are going up. But overall, there weren't a lot of big surprises on the high-end side of things, which allowed us to be in at that budget point for this project.
So I think you summarized it very well. This isn't really changing the scope of the work at all. This is now we have identified contractors that are actually going to be working on this and committing them to bids that are within our budget.
Yep, that is correct. Unless we were to go above and beyond all of those different allowances and contingencies and so forth, this is what you're looking at for that guaranteed maximum price. And again, all of those, if Findorf wants to use an allowance, they have to get that approval from our team here. They don't just get to use those allowance dollars at that point in time.
What's helpful, certainly the project has a ways to go, but as it relates to continued assurance to taxpayers, this is a very good sign that we were able to get bids within budget.
Yep.
And under budget.
And Jeff and his team will go through every single pay app that comes in, all those different things, down to when you see things like, your site utilities that you're going to have, your different general conditions, what are being billed for and all of that. So there's at least a monthly checkpoint, but, I talk to Jeff and Michelle, I think like every other day sometimes, so they will be watching that on a regular basis, those bills come in.
Great. Other questions? This also is an action item. I'd move to approve the amended Findorf AIA contract for Jackson Elementary School project as presented. Is there a second? Dr. Temez, thank you. Motion and second to approve the amended Findorf AIA contract for Jackson Elementary School project as presented. Final discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we discuss future agenda items in our board meeting calendar. Our board meeting calendar for regular board meetings taking place February 9th and 23rd of the Education Service Center, 5:30 p.m. February 3rd, we have a curriculum committee meeting at 4:30 p.m., Education Service Center. And February 17, we have scheduled a policy committee meeting, 4 p.m., Education Service Center. I believe that's it for the board calendar. We remind the public to look for the official meeting postings in case the time or date or location might change. Any questions on the board meeting calendar? Are there any other items for follow-up and communication? Hearing none, we have an item that's appropriate to discuss in executive session. So I would move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and take any such action if necessary based on its discussion, namely compensation and base wage negotiations. I've made that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kelly. We have a motion and second to adjourn into executive session. Any final discussion? Hearing none, I will call the roll. Mr. Pickler? Yes. Ms. Kruger? Yes. Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Swigert votes yes. Ms. Aragot? Yes. Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Dr. Temez? Yes. All right, we are unanimous and we are adjourned into executive session. Thank you to those who joined today in person or online. We look forward to seeing you at a future meeting.